goals of jihad vary widely. Again, just read down the list. It sounds different. One goal might be the conversion of as many infidels as possible before the end of the world, which many believe to be imminent. Well, that's a much different goal than global conquest, isn't it? I was ordered to fight people until they say, there is no God but Allah. When they have said that, then their blood and their property is protected from me solely by reason of saying it, and judgment upon them is in the hands of Allah. Onward, Christian soldiers, right? Onward, Christian soldiers. That's what that's all about. Second possible goal, the conquest of territory. You know, I don't think America has ever gone out in quite the same way, but we've certainly had our tentacles in lots of things, haven't we? We're all over the world in a variety of ways, whether it be through our armed forces or a variety of other things as well. So we're certainly out there, and we're right now in the middle of Afghanistan and Iraq. The spoils of victory. That can be another big motivation for some people. And then finally, the opportunity to be a martyr, dying after fighting in the cause of Allah, which is something we hear a lot about today. A Bedouin came to the Messenger of Allah and said, a man can fight for fame, another can fight in order to receive praise, yet another to receive spoils, and another in order to show off. The Messenger of Allah said, whoever fights in order to make the word of Allah the highest, that person is fighting in the way of Allah. So an interesting kind of group of pictures there, isn't it? In terms of some of that early, again, this is early motivation that comes out of the Quran and also the hadiths that developed after the Quran. A lot of different pictures here, though, not one particular way. Offensive, defensive. I think it was probably some of both. I think it was more defensive, at least at the very beginning, but I think it quickly became more offensive for some people. It really did. Yes?
I would disagree with you on America fighting for territory. You think of the Mexican War and our acquisition of Arizona and New Mexico and the whole process of what we refer to as manifest destiny.
Sure.
That we should own all of South America, Cuba, Mexico, it should all be ours. I think it was it. We were there.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I was just painting with a broad brush stroke. You know. But I'll go along with that. Manifest destiny was a big deal for us, wasn't it? If you happen to be an American Indian or of that descent, you're going to have a different picture than you might if you were an Anglo.
We don't have to go to Mexico there, but right out here.
Yeah, we can.
Right here, exactly. Last night I was doing a crossword puzzle, and the clue was loser in that Bighorn. And I fought like everything to try to put Crazy Horse or Sioux in there. I really did. It took a long time before I realized it was Custer.
Custer, yeah. Custer. Custer. Yeah, the conquest of territory can be the conquest of oil. We'll hang on to that thought because that is part of it. And part of their suspicion. I think part of Arab's suspicion of us is what are our interests? Is it theirs or is it ours? As the early conquests of Islam died down, another version of jihad began to become more prominent. Jihad came to be seen as spiritual struggle, as striving to follow in the right path of God. Many contemporary Muslims prefer to emphasize the spiritual side of jihad. I really can't blame them one bit for wanting to say, can we just let that go? Can we just let those early years of conquest go? And can we follow our religion in a place like Rochester, Minnesota? We're not out here to take over Minnesota, right? So you can see why they want to really say it was meant to be spiritual from the beginning. See, and I don't know the answer to that question, but I can certainly see why that's said by moderate Muslims. I can certainly see why they said that. I think there was some offensive and some defensive that was going on from the very beginning. And, or if not from the very beginning, right afterwards, because it certainly was evident in the kind of conquest that happened, whether it be tribes or regions or entire nations. I think maybe a little bit, if they deny that there was any of that offensive early on, if Muslims deny that, it's not unlike some of the revisionist history. I don't mean to sound cruel when I say that, but some of the revisionist history you get with the Mormons and Joseph Smith. We never advocated for polygamy. right? That was a sect over there, but that was not the way it was intended from the very beginning. Well, no. You know, I think anybody that looks at it from the outside in says, no, there was polygamy, and it changed over time because of the laws of this country. Yeah. So I think there's probably a little revisionist history going on, but we probably do some of the same thing with the Crusades and other things as well, because we just don't like to look back at some of those things and see what was done in the name of Christ at those times.
You're talking about war. How does Marshall Plan and Lend-Lease figure into that?
Boy, anybody want to answer that that's smarter than me? You got an answer? Say more about it. What are your thoughts, Dave? No?
It's what you're talking about, how you treat other nations, and of course the origin of that war could be talked about a long time too.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
the treatment of the defeated.
Absolutely. And we've had some good track records along the way, some very good. And some other ones that weren't so good. You know, when you think of Guantanamo and some of the stuff that happened there, not so good, perhaps. You know, I think, you know, for every 100 good things, there's probably 2 of them that make the press that are really bad. And that's part of the problem too, because there's nothing like a humiliation that happens when they strip Muslim prisoners naked and then humiliate them, and then it's on the internet today, everywhere. And so it looks like we're barbarians, doesn't it? But I think in general, our armed forces and the people that are serving are really trying to do the best job they possibly can. I really believe that. You know? Let's go on. The roots of Muslim rage, and this is something that came out of Bernard Lewis. And this is one theory kind of looking at jihad today and trying to understand what's happened in the last, 1,300 years since Muhammad. And this was written in 1990. I think it's interesting to kind of look at the dates. Bernard Lewis, of course, is an expert on Islam and certainly written plenty about it along the way. According to Bernard Lewis, the struggle for good and evil has been present in Islam since the very beginning. If the fighters in the war for Islam are fighting for God, then it follows that their opponents are fighting against God. Much of that holy struggle has been carried on against Christendom. As long as Islam was advancing, the struggle was well and good. However, over the last 300 years, Muslims have suffered successive stages of defeat. If you read the article, you know, he talked about the fall of the Ottoman Empire basically being complete by about the beginning, or right around World War I. And then some of the colonization that happened with the European powers following that into the Middle East especially. And then the importing of a lot of westernized values, a lot of political structures that were imported from top down, and to a large extent it didn't work. So that's where Lewis is going with many of these things. This defeat, states Lewis, has shown up in 3 ways for Muslims: the loss of world domination to the West, invasion of foreign ideas into his own country, and emancipated women and rebellious children, more Western influence, led to the loss of control of his own house. This defeat has led to feelings of humiliation, and that's a word that shows up a lot, isn't it? That word, humiliation. What is truly unacceptable to the Muslims, according to Lewis, is the domination of infidels over true believers. This led to the corruption of religion and morality in society, and to the neglect or even flouting of God's law as found in the Koran. Have you run into a word in some of your reading? I think it goes like this, and I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, but Jahiliyyah. Have you ran into that? Jahiliyyah, what does it mean? Jahiliyyah was the barbarous state, the kind of out-of-control, tribal, barbaric state that existed before Muhammad. Okay? And if you have a nation that has lost all its values along the way, isn't following the Quran, isn't following in the ways that they've been taught, Sharia, the Hadiths, and things seem just as bad as ever, what's this world coming to kind of thing, then maybe you're going to make a call for something else that needs to happen. And you know, some of these were the early seeds, I think, in Islamic fundamentalism, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. But I think it was this kind of rallying cry. We have to go back to the basics that we had under Muhammad, because remember how bad it was before Muhammad got here? And that's what I think it felt like in a lot of these countries. They were dominated by infidels. They had all these influences coming in from the West or wherever, not just from the West, but they painted with broad brushstrokes. And so we have to go back to those basics of Muhammad so that we're not living like this. And I really think that was part of what was going on. And they saw that as part of the corruption of society. Okay? And related to that, the two chief enemies of the West, according to Islamic fundamentalism, are secularism and modernism. Secularism shows up in everything from the way we run our government to the values we choose to live by. You know, I don't know if Muslims care about Fred Phelps, but we heard the Supreme Court ruling, right? Did that happen just yesterday? And in the name of freedom of speech, Fred Phelps can do anything he wants at a funeral, right? Very, very few restrictions. 8-1 was the vote. What's that look like to the rest of the world looking in? You know what it looks like? It looks like this, right? Jahiliyyah. How could you live that way? How could you make choices like that? How could you have a society that allows those kind of things to happen? You can begin to see that you get this in the hands of the wrong preacher, right? Or maybe the right preacher, I don't know. But this turns into a powder keg after a while, doesn't it? And so that's the enemy, at least part of the enemy as they see it. And modernism leads us to ignore the right path of God in search of fame, riches, and other products of a decadent culture. Well, let's be honest, that sounds a little like America sometimes, doesn't it? We live that way. We live that way sometimes.